Welcome to the UST Education recorded webinar series. This session is powered by US Transactions. UST is a boutique payment processing firm providing you with personalized service. We offer agnostic, best-fit technology solutions for associations, nonprofits, and enterprise clients.
Everybody, pleasure to be here. Happy to, let me just go and share my screen here for everybody's benefit so that we can go and dive right in. So welcome everybody and look forward to being of value to you through today's session. My request is just ask questions as we go through today. There's some questions that I will go and have for the audience. So between Erica and myself, we will go and make sure that everybody's questions get answered. And as part of that, let me dive into what we go and have. And where we come from is something that I've gone and seen in a lot of my work across going and running valuation, being an expert witness in the court system, authoring standards around valuation and reporting globally and in the United States. And one of the things that we continuously go and see is an assumption that valuation methodologies and practices are relatively standardized and formal and static. And the goal that we have here is to be able to go and take a look at how do you do that inside the association space. And having gone and worked with nonprofits and associations in my career, the drivers are quite different from what you might just go and see from a typical online search or using ChatGPT or something like that. So on that note, let us dive in. So before we begin, there's two questions that I have for you, and feel free to kind of drop it into chat as we do this. One is, which direction is your members' average age heading? And the second one is, in the last 3 years, how many of your member organizations have merged, have been acquired, or have gotten dissolved in your space? Is it none, a few, or is there a noticeable wave that you're going and noticing? Perfect. So I'm seeing a range of answers here from high 50s, 30 to 60 on the age. Average age is around 45. And going and seeing that there is a trend line that is emerging in terms of mergers, but also those that are going out of business. And it's fantastic. So thank you. Appreciate a lot of that and continue to kind of put those answers into chat as we continue here. So as you're already noticing it, this is happening, and your peer world is already consolidating. So I went and pulled some examples that are there, like Associations West has merged state societies for common governance. We're seeing that the membership growth is now declining, especially in a post-COVID environment. And another key part that is there is that only 11% call their value proposition very, very compelling. And what this does is it goes and creates a very interesting challenge and situation for associations, which is, what is an association today? And if we look at how a lot of associations formed, many of them are from a pre-internet era that kind of got a strong credibility, got a generational buildup, and have kind of survived the digitization of the world to various degrees of success or not that are there. So where we're trying to go and kind of get to in this conversation is, inside this situation, how do you go and value your association for the purposes of a merger or an alliance or whatever the heck that you're going and looking for? Because the practices are not the same as across other industries that is there. So the other key thing that is there, building on what I've gone and said about the past 25, 30 years that we've had, is that most of what decides your association's future is increasingly set by forces outside of your control. It's member consolidation, the industry structure, AI and demographics. And what's great is you have the intelligence to be able to see this, and it's also critical to start being able to go and act on this as well. And membership dues are not sufficient to be able to go and drive revenue these days. We're going and seeing in a lot of associations that we've had conversations with that the dilemma that is there is getting corporate sponsorship on behalf of employees, if it's not an individual member-driven exercise, or at other times, even reimbursement programs are no longer there. So the notion of getting training and credits is being challenged across various different spaces as well. And these are all factors that are here, and they all inform how to think about valuation in the association space. So what I want to go and start with is to kind of redefine what we're talking about as a term around value. And there is no such thing as a value. You can't go and say that a certain amount of members is worth X, or you're a multiple on a certain amount of renewals that you're going to able to maintain. And the other key part is that value is a loaded word. It could be financial value. It could be the value that you go and bring. It could be the value that you are. It's the value that is gone and ascribed to you by your own members or by the industries or audiences that you go and serve. And one thing that we've gone and seen in a lot of our work is that peer or mission merger is a very, very critical driver of value. What are you trying to go and achieve? Because if the purpose of an association is financial success first, or financial monetization and short-term results first, you're going to die very, very quickly, as you probably already know. So it's that friction between having more of a mission-driven exercise versus the increasing complexities in commercial realities and getting audiences to go and participate. The second one is a cross-sector partner. So this could be you have common geographies, you have complementary administrative structures. You might be able to go and get benefit from common operations and reach, and you're not necessarily having member overlap. And this is something that can happen, has happened, and it's becoming an increasingly interesting phenomenon because the infrastructure that we're going and seeing in the corporate world is we're doing less and less in-house and we're outsourcing more and more to vendors that specialize in these domains. In associations, that is sometimes quite difficult to go and do because the capabilities are pretty bespoke, and being able to go and identify common practices or common geographies, even around something as simple as event management and governance, is something that can be sufficient to go and facilitate a merger that goes from there. The other key part that is there is a for-profit asset buyer. And this one has a lot of friction that is associated with it because these are people who are wanting to go and monetize the brand name that has been built, maybe the reputation and credibility that is there, or get access to credentials or data or other assets that is there. And frequently, what we're noticing is that a lot of these decisions or scenarios are being explored without really consideration for what is going to go and happen with the members. And if you go and do just a few Google searches or AI searches, you'll go and discover that members are starting to have a backlash towards certain mergers or sales of any of these types. So a question for the room. When your board says the association's value, what do they mean? Do you recognize this as value to your members? Is it around the value of the dues that you collect? Is it your mission reach? Is it something else? Would love to see some answers in chat. Okay, we're seeing dues. What else? Service and advocacies, value to members, values to the industry. Okay, fantastic. Okay, advocacy. Okay, so generally it is value in the benefit to the membership that is there. But I think the responsibility is that aspect of being able to go in and generate enough value at a good exchange of fees and dues that comes back to you and be able to go and do that. And that is a challenge today. So what happens in the association domain and in the nonprofit space, from what I've gone and seen, is that the boilerplate guide on how to value a business does not apply, yet it is frequently where people go and start because that's where a lot of the content is. It's almost viewed as like the training data for AI these days, where there's a lot of content. You think that that is the basis of how to look at it. So the boilerplate structure is you go and take a look at market approaches, compare your transactions to similar organizations, apply an average multiple, you assume that a pool of true comparables exists, and then you go and discover that you need to be able to convince a whole bunch of other audiences to go and use the same principles as you have. And frequently we're going and seeing that there's a big gap between those figures. The next one is around income, which is to project the future cash flows that is there for the organization. In associations, of course, this is the dues stream, maybe the event stream, and then discount those values to today. Well, what has gone and happened over the past half decade, especially, is that a lot of the dues and events related revenues for associations have been quite erratic. We have gone and worked with some organizations and spoken to several others who have gone and seen event revenue plummet. They of course, dropped to zero during the height of COVID, but has never not even recovered to 40% of pre-COVID values today. And also with further digitization and platforms such as Zoom, the role of physical events don't have the same value as they did before. So that geographic concentration, these factors that are there, is really going and impairing income. And historically, a lot of income-based valuations were done based on the previous 2 to 3 years financial results and projections for the next 2 to 3 years. But as you may be experiencing yourself already, those numbers may not necessarily be very positive for most associations today, given the numbers that I showed earlier this presentation. So the third one is, well, let's go and sell our assets. And this is, we could go and sell our list and see if there's a for-profit organization that wants to be able to come in and monetize it. Or you could have gone and created a certification that has been built under a nonprofit structure, but it has a lot of monetary value in the marketplace, and a for-profit organization may want to come in and expand upon it. So in those situations, well, what is that value? And one of the biggest things that we go and see is that there's an assumption that the asset will not change in value if the transaction happens. And what I kind of want to bring forth is a notion of, look, there's a cat that's going to come out of the bag. If you go and say that you're going to be selling your association for a for-profit organization, then there's going to be a reckoning that's going to come from members as to how many will want to be there. They will want to go and get certainty with regards to fees, dues, service, et cetera, that is there. If it's an asset-based evaluation that is there to go and take a look at merging or becoming a subsidiary or part of another association, it's the same thing that is there. If you look at the mission is there typically for the members. So this is why each of these three approaches has major flaws in being able to put it as a boilerplate approach to associations, because in association M&A, the act of even pursuing a merger or a sale is going to go and have a change in the operating state of the association. So what's really interesting is that even the IRS itself, which is an adjudicator of a lot of valuation premiums and was money made on this transaction, has it very clearly goes and articulates that no formula works and it needs to be something that is recognized by both parties. So I want to kind of just give you that warning here that you want to stay away from very generic approaches to association valuations and be very conscious of the extra effort that will need to be done at the beginning to understand how would you be willing to go and value yourself. And then if you do have conversations with other parties, get very flat with them first on how they value in the space too. And before you proceed to any conversations of transactions, make sure that you're very, very clear that you're actually in a mutually agreeable way of valuing your organization and entity. So let's kind of dive in a little bit as to why this is such an issue. So for an association, all three approaches fundamentally break down as I've been going and seeing. Assets, you have no formal equity, right? Most associations today don't own their real estate or other physical things except for token things on your financial statements. So your mission, your brand, your reputation, your credentials, they're not on the balance sheet because our accounting system doesn't allow that. So you want to be able to understand what that is in the event of a transaction. Because if you're going and merging or if you're being bought, there needs to be some kind of a recognition of what that value is. And again, it goes back to what is going to be the other side of the transaction for the members who are participating at events and paying your membership dues and other sources of revenue. That, of course, then ties to income, the same thing that is going and happening. The general trend is that most associations are seeing an increase in average age, are seeing a decrease in the growth of their membership, and we're even seeing a pretty significant growth now in associations that are getting the double negative, which is that they're seeing a decline and they're seeing the average age going up, meaning that they're not getting enough new people joining, as older people retire or pass away. And to kind of go with the thesis of this whole presentation, there is no market for associations. And what's become very, very clear from looking at other nonprofit spaces that I've been part of before is that using a comparable cross-jurisdictionally or cross-industry really is a flawed approach because you will either overvalue or undervalue based on market comparables because the underlying drivers of who your customer is are fundamentally different. So being able to understand how critical the membership is to their day-to-day, how much it drives their personal fulfillment or their professional credibility. All these different factors are there to go and consider, and we'll dive into that in a moment. So how should you actually think about value? And I'm going to kind of walk you through it in terms of how we approach this at Avasta. We go and do a lot of work around strategic valuation. As I mentioned previously in my introduction, I've helped author valuation standards and board reporting, and I continue to go and do so both academically and through associations and industry standards. So let's start by clearing away these three myths that are here. And I'm going to go and use a client example. And I'm not going to be using an association example, but I'm going to be walking you through the same principles of what you're going to be running into so that you can understand when to apply this and when not to apply this. And the most critical part, and this drives me crazy personally and professionally, is a lot of people will go and say, well, look, the average transaction value in your industry is X. And what you can go and see here is in the work that we did for one of our clients, the average was at around 12 times EBITDA in their industry and about 2 times revenue. But look at the spread of all the transactions that were going and happening. The concentration within the average was actually very, very low. And depending on who you went and used as the yardstick, your valuation was significantly under, or the average valuation was significantly under or significantly over. And most organizations that we've gone and worked with, whether businesses or nonprofits or associations, are actually not mapping themselves to the state of the market. So the first thing that I want to really, really emphasize is don't use the average, unpack the average. Get to an understanding what drives it. In this situation, it was revenue and EBITDA. In other situations, we have gone and seen number of donors, the average contribution per donor broken down by segment. We've gone and seen it by membership dues. We've gone and seen it by margin on events versus memberships versus other fees. So you want to be able to break down how your association generates revenue and what are other comparable revenue models that go and exist. And going back to what I said earlier, it's very, very critical that you are in a very clear understanding of how the other party views things the same way. The second one is that the biggest name sets your ceiling. And we've seen this happen time and time again, where there's a transaction that happens in the marketplace and people say, well, I think I'm worth 60% of that. Well, how do you be able to rationalize that is extremely difficult. So for this client example that we went and had, we were able to go and show them how variable the transactions were based on the size of the transaction. And you can go and see that the highest variance was in the 100 million to 400 million dollar range. And there was actually a much more consistent valuation range if the revenues were over 400 million. And being able to go and figure out where you fell is a very, very critical driver. So if you're a smaller association, but with very high dues because of specialization, you have potentially much higher margins per member. So using membership count as the proxy for valuation may be something that impairs you. Using revenue per member as the proxy may go and give you a false sense of comparable value if you go and take a look at how much larger associations are on headcount, but much lower on a revenue per member or similar revenue structure that is there. So that's something that I think is very, very critical. So just going and seeing a transaction value in the marketplace or something that has high recognition is not a predictor of your valuation that you should be going and looking at. So the third myth is that the valuations are relatively straightforward. And as you can see in this example for one of our clients, the valuation ranges spiked significantly during the COVID era because there was a lot of changes in what was happening in the industry. This company was well tuned for remote work, and there was a lot of impacts that were there. And what we were able to go and articulate to them is that, hey, that era of transactions is not something you can refer to in 2025. And that was really, really, really critical that is there. So, Suzanne, thank you for that question. How do you come up with a valuation if the merger is one of equals? So, it goes to what is the notion of equals that is there. And getting to that common definition is very, very critical. Are you equals in that you're serving generally the same audience because your ultimate beneficiaries of your membership is either the same industry or the same geography, but with a kind of a common value proposition? Then you need to figure out, okay, is it based on member count? Is it based on revenue? Is it based on access? For evaluation, the merger of equals, you really want to go and see which direction are both organizations going. If both organizations are continuing to grow their membership and their retentions and their revenue base, then that is a much better sense of a membership of equals, and it may become very simple in kind of figuring out the balance of that ratio by having it be off of maybe relative member count or something like that. But if one organization is declining while the other one is growing, and they might have similar sizes, you might have a very difficult time having both parties agree that they are equals. So the one who's growing may go and say, hold on a second, we're doing better than you are, even though you have the same member count and you're declining. If you have a revenue model that is not sufficiently similar and being absorbable and acceptable by the members of both organizations, then that part is very critical as well. And actually, that goes and raises to something that we've gone and seen in a lot of these situations, which is what is the revenue model? Are the dues the same? Are the event fees very similar? And if you have one association with 10,000 members where people are going and spending $100 a year, and another organization with 10,000 members and they're spending $500 a year, that is a financially unequal membership, even though the count is the same. So going back to it, Suzanne, what you want to go and take a look at it is, okay, what are all the things that we have similar to each other? How many things do we have different from each other? And then you start doing some financial math that involves revenue per member. What is the change in membership year over year? What is the change in average revenue per member year over year? And the mix of revenue that you're going and getting. And what I can tell you is that membership, a merger of equals is a very political statement. I have never seen a merger of equals because ultimately you're going to go and have one president or one CEO. And I've gone and seen smaller organizations growing faster acquire larger organizations that have plateaued. So would you call that a merger of equals as well? So thank you for that question. I think it was a very, very good caveat. And please continue to put in questions as we're going through here. Suzanne preempted me very, very well as we're about to kind of go into my next section and go from there. So a partner values your future contribution under their model, not your history. And I really want to emphasize why this is so critical because almost all valuation models and transactions that we have gone and reviewed has been people going and justifying that the future, the rosy parts of the future will match the rosy parts of the past. And today, that is increasingly ending. One of the standards that I've been involved in and continue to be involved in developed by an association is around boardroom reporting of intangible assets and intellectual capital. And one of the key drivers that is there is a recognition now systemically across industry, academia, that historic reputation, regardless of whether it's consumers or businesses or even political buyers like governments, um, historic reputation does not have the strength in driving purchase or consideration as it used to. Instead, it's an anticipation of future potential, future relevance, future credibility. Will you be around? Can you survive these situations, etc. So one of the things that this does is it's informed a lot of the valuation work that I've had to participate in and review. And most of the time, the valuation shortfall that is there 2, 3, 5 years after transaction happens is that they severely overestimated that the historical reputation and credibility would go and drive future demand and revenue. And I would say that is probably one of the most taboo topics inside nonprofits and associations that I've had in the past 5 or 6 years since COVID. It is very, very clear that if you have an honest conversation, the world fundamentally changed after 2020. And we go and have differences across various sectors that had heavy dependence on in-person participation or continuous exposure to others. Real estate has gone and had that happen. Associations has gone and had that happen. Industry conferences and events, the whole event circuit, physical event circuit, is just not returned to the same dynamic. And if that conversation is not had by the leadership and boards of associations as to what is our actual operating model that serves our members' utilization model for the next 5 to 10 years, you are going to be in a very, very difficult position. And I really invite you to go and consider those taboo topics. And if they're not being discussed, that is actually a very big signal that you're going to have a very difficult time in a merger and association. And instead of coming from a position of strength because you have the right data, even if you don't like it, you're at least able to go and position yourself or defend yourself in a negotiation that's there. So the question that I have for you is how many of your associations are having these conversations? How many of you have had a very clear review of the state of your association the past 5 years versus the previous 5 years versus the next 5 years? I'd be curious to hear if this is even on the docket with boards. Okay. All right. I'm seeing the nopes. We did this 6 years ago. There was a sprinkle, general discussion, very few. Okay. Yeah, exactly. So it was done during the pandemic. So you are all representing exactly what is the basis of the situation. And what this gives rise to is what we go and experience in a lot of our transaction work is essentially a cliff that all of a sudden shows up. And if you're kind of familiar of the statement by, death by a thousand cuts, the first few cuts are pretty small. They don't really go and affect you. But eventually you get to a threshold where you can't recover from it. And my concern is that to be able to do this, organizations need to be constantly aware of what is the drivers of engagement, utilization, relevance, alternatives for the members, and be able to go from there. So there's a question is, we founded a related entity 8 years ago. How would you initiate this sort of a project? I think the key part that's here is to go and take a look at your medium to long-term forecasts, the assumptions that were made, and how much of them were actually realized, and where you were ahead of what you projected, where you were at what you projected, and where you were kind of below. That is there. That is something I've kind of gone and noticed is happens in a lot of organizations. They don't really reconcile medium-term forecasts and guidance. They'll do a year over year or a quarter over quarter, but very infrequently do I see organizations looking at plans from 2 to 5 years earlier and seeing how much they've got to manifested. Sarah, you're saying you're a bit of an outlier in that you review your practice every year. I suspect there may be people on this call that will want to reach out to you and find out how is that happening, because that is very much I would say, an operating practice of the leadership and the board of an association to be able to go and do this. And kudos to you for the fact that you at least have that practice and lens to yourself. So I think that part's good. And what this also goes and does is something that I've increasingly been an advocate of in the podcast series that I've been part of is that organizations should be transaction ready at every single time. And now you might be going and wondering, hold on a second, we're an association, stuff happens so infrequently. There's like maybe one or three others that are like us in our space. Why would we want to be able to go and take a look at it? Well, the reason for it is that there's a level of rigor that applies to how you govern yourself as an organization. And the other reason is because a lot of the failure is starting to increasingly manifest across the board. We are seeing the average lifespan of companies and organizations be shrinking dramatically. To give you a sense, since the year 2000, the average public company lifespan has dropped almost 50%. The average association longevity of the likelihood of them going and surviving another decade has been reduced dramatically because they've either had to wrap up or be absorbed into another entity. So what this means is you may want to be looking at what is the state of our space. If we are plateauing or having a decline in our membership, well, who else in our space is doing the same thing? Is anybody growing in our environment? And if there's a collective decline, there's a very big warning and then also an opportunity because if you kind of get yourself ahead of the situation, you may be able to go and drive how you go and interact with the marketplace and maybe able to go and get a merger of unequal partners because of the fact that you are on top of it. And unfortunately, the other entity that is looking to continue to survive on behalf of their members didn't do their homework and their preparation. And I know, again, it's another uncomfortable topic or conversation, but we're increasingly seeing how uncomfortable conversations need to be had more and more. In the past 18 months, the majority of the engagements I've been involved in has been around AI-led valuation disruption or customer acquisition and retention disruption in their industry, regardless of whether it's businesses, consumers, or other forms of revenue. So, yeah, Suzanne, yeah, very good point that you're going and saying. Every similar organization in your space is seeing a decline because of retired credentials professionals and fewer is entering the profession. Beautiful example, right? And at a certain point, and it's unfortunate that this is a beautiful example, but at a certain point, what is that critical mass of membership and participation volume that you need to be able to maintain your credibility? And that is something that I think a lot of people are going and struggling with. And if those questions are not being had, then all of a sudden the cash is not there. You need to start going and doing cuts. You may need to go and start, you may be by necessity be forced to organize back ends with other associations. And I do want to kind of draw upon that aspect of it. Today, more than ever, it is possible to get into administrative alliances with other associations where a lot of common practices do not need the same volume or activity of governance that is there. A lot of bookkeeping capabilities, administrative and other organizational aspects that are there that are kind of agnostic with regards to the association is actually valuable and beneficial to ally with another organization instead of having to go and absorb the full-time costs yourself. And this kind of goes to what I mentioned earlier, which is around vendor specialization that we're going and seeing for a lot of companies and associations in terms of going and using people that are very good at what they are because they've gone and built an operating model to do that very, very well. So let's go to look at some of the value drivers that are there. So one of the key things is revenue model resilience. So winnable membership is a really big one. How much of your addressable membership and non-dues revenue is still untapped? So this kind of goes to, are you professional accreditation? Are you a circumstantial membership? These are things that you need to be able to kind of go and figure out. But you really do want to find out, what is the common component or descriptor of what makes up your member? Is it a type of degree that they have? Is it a type of company that they work in? Is it a type of solution space that you're involved in? And you want to figure out what is that population and is that growing or decreasing? The beauty is to collect that data has become way cheaper than it was 10 to 15 years ago, let alone 30 years ago. But a lot of the leadership that we're going and seeing in nonprofits and associations is they're not kind of adjusting themselves to do that work because that's not how they got brought up. But I do invite everybody on this call or listening to the recording to go and start taking a look at it. It's like, hey, what is the general trajectory of the type of demand that should exist for the types of capabilities that we bring to our members in our association? The second one, building on what I went and said before, is merge readiness. You want to give consideration that if you are somebody who has greater strength or stability or lower risk, that you may be in a situation where you need to absorb somebody else, or for the benefits of your own organization and that of your members, you may need to rapidly integrate members that have had to exit another association that has broken down or be able to go and help them survive. And increasingly, this kind of goes and starts taking a look at it from an alliance point of view. We're starting to go and see cross geography alliances in the same space with some associations, including the rise of kind of global alliances to be able to provide that solidarity and organization of common interests and common resources that is there. The other key part that is very, very critical and is in the view that I've gotten done both for businesses and non-businesses is a very, very clear understanding of switching costs. Why do members stay and why is it hard to leave? And the most dangerous ones is where they want to leave, but it's hard or costly for them to leave in other ways. It may not be the membership fee, but it may be the loss of the community that is there, or they don't have an alternative, or they need to be part of this association to be able to maintain their accreditation or some other aspect of it that's there. And being able to be very clear on what those switching costs are, not just monetary switching costs, but behavioral switching costs. Put another way, how much effort do you need to go through to go and shut down your bank account that only has $4.31 in it? And you're like, forget it, I'm just going to keep that money in there. So keep increasing that number until you realize that you're like, okay, well, there's 3,000 left in there. I don't like that bank. I'm willing to go through the pain of getting out of that bank and keeping whatever money that's going to be there. Consider that that is happening with some or many association members that are there as we're going and seeing a lot of chaos and erraticism in the marketplace that is being created across the board, across almost every single industry today. So continuing to that, the second one is driver two, consolidation and partner appetite. So how rare is your operating model and how you bring value to your members? Or what type of data do you make available for them, or you give access to them or through them that otherwise wouldn't be available? Rarity is increasingly earning a premium, especially if it is commodification resistant, meaning that you cannot go and get the stuff easily off of a Google search or in ChatGPT summary for yourself. So being able to go and have that content or having that enriched data or exposure in a way that cannot be kind of stripped away from the association is an increasing value driver that we're going and seeing and is kind of starting to be the very strong divider between the haves and the have-nots on a go-forward basis. Um, and this is kind of goes and starts creating this interesting dynamic of how much of your revenue base is based off of access, how much of your revenue base is based off of the credential, and how much of the revenue base is based off of essentially the community side of things that you're going in involved. So these are things that are kind of three factors I would recommend for all of you to be looking at on a regular basis. Timing also matters. Go and take a look at what is going and happening from a sector cyclicality. The best moment that we've typically gone and seen is when a nearby deal closes and it just creates enough attention for people to go and say, hold on, maybe we should be going and exploring this because we weren't expecting this transaction to happen in a related association space. Maybe we should be considering it now. And again, if you're proactive about it, you can be ahead of the curve. And as we've typically seen in a lot of our evaluation and transaction work, having greater intelligence and understanding of the market conditions gives you an advantage in being able to go negotiate terms with the other parties that you're discussing. And lastly, who's buying? Is this a peer merger? Is this a cross-sector? Is this a for-profit? And each values things very, very differently. And if you have not gone through a for-profit conversation, this one is the one that is closest to kind of like a business valuation architecture, but it's also one that may be philosophically the most objectionable to how you organize, how you operate, and maybe something that you need to do, and as one that can gets a lot of backlash from members frequently as well, in terms of how associations have kind of come to be. One other thing that I want to kind of emphasize that is here is that it's also very much more difficult to start up an association today than it was decades ago. And you might notice that the average age of associations is generally rising versus new ones are continuously coming up to be able to take space that is contextually relevant today. The third one is your performance in context. And this is an example from one of our clients again, where we really wanted to go and emphasize that when they were looking at average transaction value, um, then the average transaction value was substantially higher than the average transaction value for the highest volume of deals. So one very large deal in an industry can really skew the average transaction value. This is something that we were able to go and show them to help them understand that they really wanted to go and be able to convey themselves as a premium acquisition versus just another company transacting in their space. And this is something that I'd really kind of recommend that is regularly gone and considered for yourself is what are the comparables that you're using and the other party that you're involved in. So you also want to go and audit your own value story. So what is true today and continues to be? What is something that is misleading? It looks solid, but if you look underneath the hood, you're realizing that it's pointing you to a different direction. The critical one is to go and take a look at what is expired. This was true, but it's not true anymore. AI changed things, COVID changed things, generational shift changed things, educational criteria, whatever the heck it may be. And this is the one that really traps a lot of good organizations, is that they aren't really clear on what is kind of contemporarily relevant or future relevant around what they're going and doing. And then the last one is then it just doesn't add up. People go and make anecdotal claims, but when you try and add it up, you can't figure out where all this came from. So on that note, here's some questions for you. How many of you survey your members, and how many of your members belong to more than one association? Love to see some answers in. Yeah, okay. You do both? Okay, great. Okay, two or more. So we're seeing a lot of member engagement. This is really good. Also recognizing that your members are part of multiple. So one thing we're seeing in organizations where members are part of multiple associations is to find out how many of them are in kind of high substitution membership, and to figure out where you kind of stand in terms of the relevance and importance for them. And that it kind of gets yourself out of an assumption-based assessment of relevance to one that is really kind of grounded in the data that is there. And frequently what we're going and seeing is absent in a lot of surveys is a very clear understanding of why people continue to participate, like what draws them forward. We go and find out if they go and recommend or bring membership to them, to the association they're already part of. And that is a really critical part. Kevin, I really like what you went and said. You have a monopoly in your field. That is a situation, is of course, to go and take a look at it in terms of sometimes you just have that monopoly situation. But for other sectors where you can have kind of multiple membership types, that becomes an issue. So the next thing is to take a look at it is why members are strong, really belong, and why it is also fragile. What we're frequently not seeing in in-depth analysis and reporting in transactions is a clear understanding of why do the members stick around. People will go into a lot of aggregate reporting of, oh, we're retaining 93% of our members per year, we're adding 10%, whatever the heck it may be. There's a lot of unconscious participation that is there that is not unpacked or is only unpacked anecdotally or even worse by assumption. So this is something that we really do recommend, if you're not doing it already, is to find out why are your members your members? Why have they not switched to something else? And looked at it. How many have returned as members, if that's also something that's relevant for you? These types of intangibles are the real moat for you, but it's also something that can really erode first in how you're going to operate. So for you, the question for you is What's the single biggest reason a member that cannot leave? And Kevin, you can't answer because you have a monopoly. But then also, what's the biggest hurdle to new members being able to go and join? I'd love to hear some of those. And if you don't know, please say so. Okay, so some of you don't know. You don't even know what exactly the offer is. Dues seem to be a hurdle. Don't know how you could be benefit. Fee for service. Okay. Sometimes seeing hard time seeing people having getting value out of it. Yeah, ROI and dues. Okay, this is very interesting, very relationship and tenure driven. So I'm starting to kind of go and see that oh, interesting. You have a large group of benefits program to save money. Okay, yeah, that's something that we're seeing more and more arise as well as associations to be able to drive retention, pool member access to discounts and other programs that are there as well, but aren't necessarily driving membership revenues and participation by the value that they're bringing as the association that they are. So that part is there. It's very, very interesting to kind of go and see some of these answers that are here. Yeah, hard to get younger people to join with dues, ROI, lesser joining, right thing to do. So this is a very, very good point that you're getting into. How many of you are starting to go and notice that this is getting into the dynamic that I was kind of calling out before of like what are people anticipating? What is the future value that they can get out of this? Revenue is no longer equal sustainability. Yeah. Young people don't see value even if the firm pays for their membership. Yeah, I've seen that one a lot, Suzanne. Thank you for sharing that. So what I'm starting to observe in this set of answers that are kind of coming here is exactly that kind of death by a thousand cuts that I was kind of alluding to throughout today's presentation. Is that by not having a sufficient understanding of future relevance, all that relevance kind of disappears. Um, yeah, company cutbacks, tariffs, AI. Yeah, so it's that recognition of value, right? Can I get this education somewhere else? Can I get this type of professional solidarity somewhere else? They haven't experienced the community. And that, by the way, is in the younger generations especially is a challenge not just from an association point of view. It is a challenge from incorporating people into workplaces, providing mentorship programs. We've actually seen a lot of ending of membership practices and programs post-COVID that I don't think organizations have kind of fully realized that is there. Yeah. Yeah, so this is very, very interesting to kind of go and see how many of there was kind of like just this perpetual expectation of continuity that I assert was there until 2020, and then in the past 6 years, because of such a disruptive event, people have had to kind of reevaluate: is this something that is important to them, or they're coming to go and discover that it may not be important in the first place. So really appreciate the type of answers that we're going and getting here. So let me kind of build on this. When associations combine, the rules are also very different. There is necessarily no price for no equity. So the currency that is being used is mission continuity, member benefit reserves, and credential equity. And this is where M&A in the association space becomes interesting because it's not necessarily I'm going to buy your association for X dollars. Um, it may be, hey, we're going to go and merge, or we're going to, aqua merge you in terms of an association. So in these situations, even though you're not necessarily going into an explicit financial calculation in some of these situations, every other aspect of a merger, divestiture, or an acquisition should actually be formally considered by these organizations to de-risk the transaction. So you may not be trying to optimize for financial value, but you do want to optimize for de-risking the transaction. Proper understanding of the audiences that are coming together. Are these complementary memberships? Why would one member benefit from the contributions of the other association that is coming into the picture, and vice versa? Is this solely a economic union, meaning that the members aren't really going to fundamentally see anything, but the ability for the association to de-risk, but both associations to de-risk themselves through lower operating costs or more stable operating practices are there. The next one is also, what's the duty to the mission? And the board's fiduciary duty runs to the mission, frequently not to the shareholders. So the question is how do you balance that friction between the mission of why the association exists versus the members that have been there versus the members that you may need to acquire to maintain the relevance and continuity of the association in the first place. And frequently, what we're going and seeing in a lot of association transaction, of course, is a member vote. And this goes back to all the other aspects of mergers, divestitures, and acquisitions, which is how do you communicate? What is the narrative that people are going and buying into? It's not solely a financial transaction. And in an M&A for the association space, the de-risking element is the most critical aspect to look at with, of course, in this situation, being the members and the member participation and the financial value of that participation as the strongest determinant. So I want to kind of just pause and ask some additional questions. What are you starting to realize for yourself to the limits that you can go and disclose in an open forum like this from the content from this discussion so far before we continue on? If you're collecting your thoughts, feel free to start typing. I will move in a little bit and I'll kind of come back to this in a moment. So, not all combinations are equal. And the piece that I want to emphasize that is often and frequently under um, valued is the role of branding. And I don't mean what is the logo or the color schema. I mean what is the actual reputation, what is the value proposition, what is the first reaction from your members and prospective members, or any members that you're going and combining with that is there. And this is across within your industry, profession. Credentials are, of course, always the jewel that is there. But then another key piece that is there is to go and take a look at what is the name, what is the affiliation that is there to go and take a look at it. And we now have a good set of answers that have been kind of put into here. So let me kind of go back and look at some of these. So what people are going and saying is, you need to start fostering membership groups that are leaving now. Yeah, that's a very, very good observation. Being able to articulate your value. So Suzanne, to your point on that one, being able to kind of go and show the narrative of the participation, the value that you've gone and had, so that the newer generations can kind of start seeing what that multi-period return is. I think what you're also kind of pointing to potentially indirectly is we are very much in an instant gratification 30-second video clip era. So if something takes months or years to go and get the full reward, that needs to be articulated a bit more explicitly. Yeah, start changing your messaging on what they should stay. One thing I really want to kind of go and emphasize on this one is back to one of the earlier slides that I went and had, which is what has gone and expired or what is in the process of expiring, and what do you need to go and put in place to be able to go and solve for this on a go forward basis. So that's something that I really, really kind of want to emphasize for people to go and do is constantly be looking at what's relevant, what needs to be made relevant that is there. Um, Open discussion to taboo topics. Thank you, Celine. That is great. And then need to focus on and defining and articulating the value. Glad to see that. Also interesting, valuing your association to your members and valuing and show your value more. Segmentation, Lauren, that is bang on. I think there's too much kind of dictated value propositions or consensus value proposition from the leadership or the board, rather than looking at the range of what the value proposition is from the perspective of the members and prospective members themselves. Um, right, dialing the value post-COVID world. Yeah. Um, yeah, evaluate potential mergers. And I think, Lisa, what you're kind of pointing to there falls into that third one, which is how much are people wanting to perpetuate the association versus perpetuating the value to the membership. That Apex and SEMA example is one where, hey, we're going to keep the designations, but really the purpose of it is to make sure that the members gain even more value out of what had them join both organizations in the first place. Yeah. Greater engagement from board members. Look at that one. That has gotten a lot of participation and reaction from the rest of the attendees today. So what's interesting here is that you're looking to go and get a greater understanding of value and contribution to your members. And many of you have gone and said that you regularly survey your membership. So my assertion is that there may be a gap in what you are actually going and serving your membership on, and getting that chunk of time for them to contribute feedback back to you may not be utilized as best as you can, especially in a situation where there's more fragmentation and disintegration of association survivability, or the need for them to be able to adapt and become much more formal in the utilization that's there. And one thing that's also very critical, and I don't think this affects to all of you, but you got to go and balance both governance and also account for the fact that antitrust is there. Some associations may want to prevent a monopoly. Some governments may want to prevent a monopoly in their jurisdiction. So that is something that needs to be looked at that way. And it also goes and drives how your own members kind of go and view the idea of a single entity for everybody or not. Do they want choice as well in the situation that's there? So, question back to you. So, if a peer association proposed a merger tomorrow, would your board know what to evaluate? And what if it's a non-peer that proposed this? Okay, so far we're batting 1,000 on nopes and no's. So welcome to our session on M&A and associations, mergers and acquisitions. So we have one party who said yes. Okay. So what about the non-peer association? So if you had somebody who came in that was cross-sector or for profit, what would go on a rise in that situation? So that's also to take a look at. So what you want to take a look at is buy, build, merge, or find a niche for how you operate. And this is going to go and help you figure out how to go and survive for the next generation. And I realized that we did more Q&A than I anticipated, but the way to take a look at it is going back to our client example. By being able to understand that the demand was greater than their own valuation of themselves, they were able to go and get a premium on their exit. So if you think you're too late, here's 3 key moves. We will be sharing the deck, and thank you for participating today. It was a pleasure to have you all. Thank you for the active engagement. Have a great afternoon.